Today, Apple's market capitalization hovers near $4 trillion, supported by a network of 2.5 billion active devices spread across the globe. But roll the clock back to the mid-90s, and the picture looks entirely different. The company was bleeding cash, racking up $1.6 billion in losses over roughly 500 days. By 1996, they were reportedly less than 90 days away from total bankruptcy. It's a recognizable pattern in technology. When hardware requirements evolve or when the original architects step away, the titans of the previous generation usually collapse. Apple managed to escape that fate, but they didn't do it by playing it safe or relying on their past successes. They survived by repeatedly and aggressively dismantling their own products to make room for whatever had to come next. The original operation ran out of a Los Altos garage in 1976. To raise $1,300 for production, Steve Jobs sold his Volkswagen bus and Steve Wozniak sold his HP calculator. That funded a run of about 200 hand-built circuit boards, priced at exactly $666.66. The commercial leap arrived the following year with the Apple II. Paired with VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet program for microcomputers, it became an essential business tool. Revenue rocketed to $117 million by 1980, driving an IPO that mentored roughly 300 millionaires in a single day. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 brought the graphical user interface to the public, a massive technical achievement. But unsold inventory quickly piled up. Bitter internal disputes followed, pitting Jobs against CEO John Sculley. The board sided with Sculley, and Jobs resigned in 1985. Over the next decade, the product line expanded into a chaotic catalog of roughly 70 different items. They built gaming consoles, licensed out Mac clones, and launched the Newton PDA. It was a sprawling portfolio that ended up confusing consumers and cutting directly into their own sales. Without a central, uncompromising editor to say no, a successful tech company will naturally accumulate products until the weight of its inventory drags it under. Desperate for a modern operating system to save the company, Apple spent $429 million to acquire Next in late 1996. That specific deal brought Steve Jobs back into the fold. As interim CEO, he immediately slashed the product line. He drew a simple grid on a whiteboard, reducing 70 overlapping products to 4 categories: consumer and professional, desktop and portable. This let them direct all engineering resources into one specific quadrant at a time, starting with the home desktop user. The result was the iMac. Unveiled in 1998, it sold 800,000 units in its first 5 months. That single piece of hardware swung the company from an $878 million loss the previous year to a $414 million profit. Reversing a collapse of that magnitude didn't involve adding features to the catalog. It required killing off perfectly functional products so the engineering teams could focus entirely on the future. They applied that willingness to cannibalize their business a decade later. At its peak, the iPod accounted for nearly half of Apple's quarterly revenue. Yet in 2007, they released a mobile phone that absorbed the music player entirely, effectively rendering their most profitable device obsolete. When Tim Cook became CEO in 2011, the strategy evolved. The focus expanded from standalone hardware invention to a massive, tightly integrated operational ecosystem. Devices like the Apple Watch dominated the health wearable market, eventually shipping more units annually than the entire Swiss watch industry. Meanwhile, the high-margin digital services segment grew from roughly $20 billion in 2015 to $109 billion by 2025. Then came the M1 chip in 2020. By dropping their 15-year partnership with Intel and designing their own silicon, they gained total control over the manufacturing process, perfectly matching hardware to software. This chart shows Apple's market capitalization over time. You can see the slow, steady climb required to hit their first major milestone, taking 38 years to reach a $1 trillion valuation in 2018. But watch what happens next. Fueled by margins, services, and stock buybacks, the line spikes. They hit $2 trillion 2 years later, $3 trillion by 2023, and $4 trillion by late 2025. Building a totally new category of consumer electronics takes a specific kind of visionary founder, but extracting $4 trillion of value from those categories requires a master of global supply chains and operations. Now they are attempting to push into spatial computing, But at $3,499, their premium headset has struggled with limited app support and steep wait, moving only an estimated 390,000 units in its first year. At the same time, the sudden explosion of generative AI caught the industry off guard. Competitors have poured hundreds of billions into frontier AI models, threatening the interface advantage Apple has held for decades. Rather than attempting to build massive language models from scratch, they pivoted to a hybrid architecture. They are licensing external models and processing the data through their own silicon servers so that it remains encrypted and locked within their secure privacy ecosystem. Whether this measured approach to AI succeeds is still an open question, but over the last half-century, Apple has shown that long-term survival in technology doesn't require being the first to invent a new system, and requires the willingness to let your most profitable ideas burn to the ground just to see what you can build from the ashes.